So first, I just want to remind everybody about attendance and receiving credit for these classes. We did not have quite as many people participate in March as we did in February. So just as a reminder, being present for this webinar is only step one. You will receive a quiz at the end of this training session, and completing that quiz and returning it to me will get you credit towards that extra half day of PTO. Again, every 5 classes that you attend, that does qualify you for that extra half day of PTO. But again, as I've said multiple times before, you're going to need to make sure you have your immediate supervisor's approval to take said PTO. With that being said, we're going to go ahead and move to our very first topic, which is something that we got a lot of questions about last month, and something that I don't think a whole lot of people probably know how to do correctly, except for our girls in Lockhart. But mobile homes is going to be our very first topic, and how not to stress out about mobile homes. So we're going to talk about a couple different things in regards to mobile homes themselves. First of all, defining what a mobile home actually is, the difference between different types of quote-unquote mobile homes, the difference from a manufactured home to a modular home to a park model to every single type of real mobile home, quote-unquote, that you could see out there. We're going to talk about the difference between electing a mobile home as personal or real property and why that's important. We're going to talk about the SOL form, how to fill out an SOL completely, how to submit that to TDHCA, and how to get that back, and then how to perfect your property as real property. We're going to talk about some simple strategies for insuring mobile homes and some of the more common issues that we see with mobile homes and how we can avoid or solve them moving forward into the future. So first thing I wanted to do was define what a mobile home really is. So a mobile home, or a manufactured home, which is the more specific term for it, they're built entirely in a factory. They're built under federal building code administered by the Department of Housing and Urban Development. So when they are manufacturing and installing mobile homes or manufactured homes, they are under very strict requirements, again, administered by HUD. They can be single or multi-section. So this is most of the time, if you hear somebody say a single wide or a double wide, they're referring to the number of sections in the manufactured home. Next, they cannot be any smaller than 8 by 40, and they have to be at least 320 square feet. So these are just kind of some general pieces of information of how we define a manufactured home. But like we've just mentioned, that the manufactured homes themselves are under very strict requirements by the Texas Occupations Code via the Texas Manufactured Housing Standards Act. This code governs the licensure of those who manufacture, retail, broker, install, or rebuild mobile homes. It sets out requirements for the general conduct of these activities. It sets standards for the installation of manufactured homes, and it establishes a statewide database. And we'll get to the database in a little bit. But I did want everybody to understand that it's a common misconception that manufactured homes are, rickety or maybe not as solid or fall apart at the seams. And I just want to let you know that, in the last 10 or 15 years, the Texas Department of Housing and Community Affairs has really taken a step towards making sure that manufactured homes are built properly, they're installed properly by people who are licensed to install them by HUD, and they're trying to get away from, I guess, that stigma of mobile homes being, again, rickety, falling apart at the seams. So there are definitely many types of, quote, mobile homes, but really we're more concerned with manufactured homes. Now, generally the next question I get is, what are not manufactured homes? And there's a couple that you'll probably run across, or maybe you've personally run across in your experience altogether. First, the more common one now is modular homes. These are homes that are not regulated by TDHCA. They're generally not built to HUD standards, but they are at least built to area location standards. And they are conveyed with the ownership recorded in a deed. So our manufactured homes are really conveyed more with the statement of ownership and location form, where modular homes are really ownership recorded with a deed. These are pretty attractive for people these days. Modular homes can be a little less expensive or a little more expensive depending on what type of home that you are developing. The modular homes are gaining some popularity. Just know that modular homes are not considered manufactured homes. They are not regulated by TDHCA, and they are not built to HUD standard. Second more common one that you probably have seen are park models, and these are what we call miniature mobile homes. So I don't know if you've seen on HGTV, these tiny spaces, tiny living. This is what we're talking about here. That's really what we call a park model. And they are regulated like a motor vehicle. They are not considered something that TDHCA deals with. I'm not even sure personally that they can even be considered real property. Again, they're regulated through the Department of Motor Vehicles, like a motor vehicle is. So modular homes and park model, these are some of the more common types of, quote, mobile homes that you're going to see out there, but they are not considered manufactured homes. When we're talking about manufactured homes for the rest of this training session, I just want you to keep that in mind. So some of the issues generally surrounding mobile homes are that, number one, they're transportable and they're made in many sections. So we talked about them being single wides or double wides, and that can be challenging in maintaining and installing the manufactured home itself. Additionally, manufactured homes are subject to many Texas laws and federal standards via HUD code. So we'll talk about the actual Texas code and laws surrounding mobile homes here in a little bit. But you're going to see that the requirements under those statutes are pretty strict. And it can be challenging for a lot of us to deal with at the title company to make sure that we are operating correctly within the bounds of manufactured homes themselves. And the biggest issue, rather, is that manufactured homes can be personal or real property. And this can be incredibly difficult and leads to special financing and taxation issues, and really is kind of the bane of our existence as a title company's point of view is concerned, because we're really concerned with making sure that the manufactured home is real property. We are not going to insure a manufactured home that's personal property, and most buyers aren't going to be thrilled about that. So that being said, we're going to take a little bit of time and talk about the difference between personal and real indicated status with mobile homes and what the big deal is surrounding it. The one thing I want you all to remember is, by default, a mobile home is considered personal property. So unless somebody has elected to treat the property as real through an SOL form or statement of ownership and location, your mobile home is considered personal property. And we'll talk about in a little bit why that's important for us, but know that we need to make sure that if we are going to be insuring a mobile home, that it needs to be converted to real property. Now, lucky for us, Texas code kind of states exactly what we need to do if we want to elect to treat the manufactured home as real property. And it's again in section 1201.2055. This section here is really what governs a lot of manufactured home issues in Texas. So if you ever had a question about manufactured homes in regards to real property, this would be the section you'd want to reference. But again, an owner may elect to treat a manufactured home as real property if the home is attached to one of two things. One, real property that is owned by the owner of the home, or the land is leased under a long-term lease. Now, from a title company's perspective, we're probably going to see the former more than the latter, but there are instances where possibly the land might not be owned by the person who owns the manufactured home. It could be under a long-term lease. That is still eligible to convert it to real property. Just know that you're probably going to see the first of these two options more common than not in your office. Now, if an owner elects to treat the manufactured home as real property, then what happens is the department, meaning the manufactured housing department through TDHCA, issues a statement of ownership and location, which basically says, okay, we understand that you want to convert the property from personal to real property. And then after they actually issue this SOL, they have to go file the certified copy of this SOL in the real property records. And they need to make sure that they notify the appraisal district that the certified copy has been filed. So this is something we're going to touch on here in a little bit, but I want you guys to know that this is one of the more common mistakes, is that you feel like you closed the transaction, you got everybody to sign the SOL form, you sent it into TDHCA, and you're done. Well, that's not necessarily true. This last section that we just talked about is called perfecting the mobile home. And until you record an issued SOL from TDHCA down at the county clerk's office and submit a copy to the county appraisal district, your property is not considered perfected, which means your conversion from personal to real property has not been completed. We'll touch about a lot more of that moving forward, but I just wanted everybody to understand that that's just an important step that commonly gets missed. So again, why do we care so much again about whether or not it's personal or real property? Well, number one, in order for a lender to foreclose, the manufactured home must be set out as real property. This is obviously something that the lender is going to absolutely make sure of. I would say maybe half the mobile home transactions I see involve financing. And obviously your lender is going to want to have the ability to foreclose on their lien. So again, important that the manufactured home set out as real property. Next, for us to insure the manufactured home, it has to be set out as real property. We're not in the business of insuring personal property. So we need to make sure that, again, that's converted if we're going to be insuring that on an owner's policy or a lender's policy. And this is more of kind of a caveat, but for the record owner, our buyer, to not have multiple tax accounts, the manufactured home must be set out as real property. So we'll talk about this in a little bit, but you might have noticed that when you open an order that involves a manufactured home that has not been previously set out as real property, you can go onto the County Appraisal District's website, search by the property address and the owner name, and you're going to probably notice that there are multiple tax accounts. Well, that's because one tax account is indicative of the real property or the land that the mobile home is located on, whether or not it's affixed to it. The second tax account has to do with the mobile home being personal property itself. Now, this ends up being one of our larger losses where we don't convert a property completely from personal to real. The tax accounts never get combined. The buyers move into a property thinking they only have one tax account to pay attention to. And then surprise, 3 years later, they get a nastygram from the tax office saying, you haven't paid your property taxes on your personal account in 3 years. By the way, it's $10K. That's, again, very common mistake to make, and it's very easy to avoid. And we'll kind of go into how to avoid this situation moving forward. But again, I want everybody to know that if there's two things from the beginning of this session that you remember. Number one, remember that until otherwise indicated, mobile homes are considered personal property. And we need to make sure that we convert the home to real property if we're going to be insuring it for multiple reasons. So the next question is, okay, well, it's excellent that I now know that, we most of the time need to have manufactured homes be real property, but how exactly do we do that? Well, the answer's honestly pretty simple. We're going to go ahead and file a statement of ownership and location. And the statement of ownership and location seems like a pretty scary form, but it's really not. This is a form that you can locate on TDHCA's website. You can print out this form or you can fill it out on the website itself. You are able to actually pull property detail for your mobile home on TDHCA's website as well. Here's the web address for you guys, and I'll make sure that you guys get a copy of this. But essentially, when you pull up this link here, what this is going to look like is, and here's our statement of location, and I'm going to show you what this is going to look like. So generally, if we are going back to our manufactured ownership records, manufactured home ownership records, this is what it looks like. It looks a lot like an appraisal district website. So I could literally just search by the property address, and I can pull any information that I need regarding to the mobile home itself. So say this is the home I'm looking for. This is really all the information that you're going to be able to need or required to complete an SOL form in its entirety. And we'll get to this in a second because I'm going to walk through how to actually complete an SOL, because that's, again, one of the more common issues that we see is either partially completed SOLs that never get submitted properly or SOLs that are never, they never have the perfection completed. So we're going to go over that. So again, I'm going to give you these links after the webinar, but this link right here is the direct link to download an SOL form if you need it. But what we're going to do right now is I'm going to have you a step-by-step tutorial of how to fill out a statement of ownership and location. Because again, I know that a lot of you might be rolling your eyes here saying, I don't deal with manufactured homes. I don't do mobile homes. Why do I need to know this information? Well, you really can't tell me that 6, 12 to 18 months into the future, you're not going to get a mobile home on your desk. Just because you're operating mostly in the center of city of San Antonio or city of Austin doesn't necessarily mean that you're not going to get a contract in the hill country and there's a manufactured home on the property. And the last thing that you want to admit as an escrow team is that you don't know how to do something as simple as fill out an SOL. So I want everybody to pay attention here, because that's definitely one of the easier things to do in regards to mobile homes themselves. So I'm going to just walk you through it and show you step by step what you need to do. It is very, very simple. So, like I said, I'm going to give you guys the link to TDHCA's Manufactured Housing Division property search. But when you identify a property that you are closing on and you have pulled your detail information, this is probably the form and probably what the page is going to look like. Now, the first piece of information that we're concerned with when we're pulling up a page like this is, how is the home elected? Now, generally speaking, you're probably going to see more often than not that the home is elected as personal property. The changes to the statement of location form and TDHCA caring more about manufactured housing is a relatively recent change. You're talking early mid 2000s. So again, when we're pulling this up, you're probably going to see more often than not the home is elected as personal property. So what we're really looking for here is many pieces of information. It'll tell you how many sections the mobile home is, what the label number is, what the serial number is, the weight, the width, and the length. These are all pieces of information that you need on your SOL form. It'll also tell you the manufacturer date if it's available, the number of sections total, the model of the mobile home, and the square footage. It'll tell you the county that the home is currently installed in, which is a good piece of information to have. If you click on this link that says print home detail, this kind of gives you more of a condensed version of the information that you really need. I'm going to let this pull up here. So one of the bigger pieces of information is that if it has the physical location of the mobile home available, it will put it here. And that's important because you'll see in a second on the SOL. So in regards to the statement of ownership and location itself, this is what this form looks like. Now, like I said, when you're opening an order and you realize that you have a manufactured home on the property, this is not something that you want to wait to complete. Now, you personally or truthfully won't be able to complete this in its entirety until closing. But you want to make sure that when you're processing a file with a mobile home that you have the statement of ownership and location prepared ahead of time of closing. So if you're really trying to be proactive, if I'm a front-end assistant, I'm going to go ahead and just complete one of these, print it out, and I'm going to keep it in my file and just lump it with my title docs or my dinky docs, or just keep it in my money folder until I get closer to closing. This is not something that you guys want to miss having signed at closing. One of the more difficult things to fix on mobile homes is realizing that we never completed a statement of ownership and location at closing, and it's a closing that took place 2 years ago. And it becomes very difficult to get people's signatures in Block 10 here for sellers and buyers on a transaction that closed, again, years ago. Now, TDHCA does have particular methods available to us to still file or issue an SOL if we can't get a signature on something. And if you are in a situation where you are in a file like that where you're like, oh my God, I forgot about the mobile home, I can't get the seller's signature on anything. If that's sitting on your desk right now, come talk to me after the webinar, because there are ways that we can get that done. But again, it's better to just be proactive than reactive with this stuff. So when you're completing an SOL, there's one of two ways you can do it. You can either complete this form by clicking and typing in here if you'd like to do that. You could also simply print this form and handwrite it in. I personally feel that typing this information in the web page kind of takes away that opportunity for TDHCA or us to misread or mistype something. So, for example's sake, we're going to say that we are converting this property from personal to real property for our transaction via statement of ownership and location. So what we're going to do is start at the very top. We're going to consider this a real property transaction. Since the property is currently listed as personal property or elected as personal property, what we need to do is under the real property transaction header, click update. So we're going to update this from personal to real. Now, type of handling, generally, the bare minimum that you will need to collect to file a statement of ownership and location is $55. Now, they do have an expedition or an expedite service. If you wanted to collect an additional $55, you could certainly do that, and it will process this a little faster. Some people prefer that, but truthfully, it's up to whatever your clients and the buyer and seller are going to be okay with. This section here is, again, for department use only. We don't need to worry about this. Block 2A, this is home information. Now, this is why it's important that we go to our manufactured housing property detail search, because if we didn't, we would have no way to know what the manufacturer's name, address, city, state, and zip, and license number were. But lucky for us, since we know how to locate this information, we can scroll down to the bottom and it gives us manufacturer information. So literally all I would do is type in this information into this blank here. So I'm going to go ahead and do that just for example's sake. I'm going to go ahead and copy this because I'm a little lazy. And we're going to go to Longmont, Colorado, 80501. Now your license number is going to be this very first number right here. And you can literally just copy paste this into our license number section. Model, date, and manufactured, total square feet, wind zone, all this information is again on our detail page. So our model is at the very top, it says Statler 2, so we can go ahead and fill in Statler 2 under the model. The date of manufactured, if it's available, will be here. Sometimes it is, sometimes it is not. If it is not available, you can go ahead and leave it blank. Square footage is important. Again, we remember that we do have a bare minimum 320 square feet, so you should never see square footage be less than that. We're going to go ahead and fill in the total square feet here as well, 728. Wind zone will either be option number 1 or option number 2. The wind zone isn't indicated here. I'm personally not familiar with where Randall County is in Texas. Now, I will say, for as far as the wind zone is concerned, you will probably see number 2 more than you will see number 1. But again, refer to your home detail page when you are filling out an SOL. Next sections are label and seal number and the complete serial number. Again, we can find this information on our detail page. Under the sections header. Now, if it's a single wide, you will only see 1. If it's a double or a triple wide, you could see 2, maybe 3 sections. That's why on the SOL form itself, it has up to 4 sections. I personally have not ever seen more than 4. I'm not even sure more than 4 exist, although I could be wrong about that. So it's just as simple as, again, copy pasting the information from my detail page over to my SOL. So all I'm doing is copy pasting information here. And again, we need the weight and the size. It seems like we wouldn't need that, but it is important. So 1740 and 14 by 52. Block 3 is the home location. Where is the home physically located? This is going to be your property address. So you're not always going to have that information on TDHCA's page. So you might need to refer to your sales contract or the information that you're receiving from the seller. But again, you need to make sure that you fill something in here in the home location. You cannot leave this blank. If you do, TDHCA will just kick it back and say you need to fill it out. Next 2 are just general questions. Was the home moved for the sale? Generally, the answer to that is going to be no. And was the home installed for this sale? So if this mobile home was previously existent, it's not brand new, that's something that you would click no for. If it's a brand new mobile home, you would say yes. In which case, you would need to include the installer name and information. We can get to that in a little bit because I do have a little bit of information on what to do with new mobile homes. Ownership information in block 4 is pretty simple. This is where you're going to put your seller and your buyer information. So my seller on my contract is going to go here. My buyer, my purchaser on my contract is going to go here. If you have a mailing address, city, state, zip, daytime phone number in the notices section on the sales contract and you would like to include this information, feel free to do so. Sometimes I've gotten away with just getting the names filled in here. Although I'm sure if Tracy or Whitney are on the call, I'm sure they could correct me here because I deal with a lot with mobile homes. You do at very least need to have a full name for the seller and the buyer. 4C is just another question. Is the transaction a sale? Again, in our purposes, it's always probably going to be yes. Now, the date of sale, transfer, ownership change. This is something that I personally will leave blank until I get to the point that I've recorded my documents, because I tried to use the recordation date for the deed of trust, or I'm sorry, the warranty deed as the date here. So if I'm preparing this form to be printed out, and maybe I'm a front-end assistant and I'm just trying to be proactive and preparing an SOL, I would leave this blank, completely empty, until I had that information with me. Now moving on to page 2, this HUD label and serial number, this will already be filled out because, again, we provided this information already in this section. GF number for title company, this is something we definitely want to put. So if I had a GF number, I would go ahead and put it right in here. If there's information regarding a right of survivorship, if there is a right of survivorship, this is information that you will need to indicate here. This is much less common, although I do see it from time to time. Now, block number 6 is really one of the more important blocks on an SOL. We're electing how we're going to be treating the mobile home itself. And as you can see in big bold letters, it says all manufactured housing is titled as personal property unless elected otherwise. So again, one of the most important things to remember, mobile homes are always personal property until we tell TDHCA that they need to be real property. And this block is what we use to tell the manufactured housing division that we're going to indicate the mobile home as real property. So we're going to go ahead and do something simple like check a box saying real property. I elect to treat this home as real property. Now you are going to need to make sure you check one of the sub boxes as well, because remember, in order for us to consider the mobile home real property, they either need to own the land that the home is located on, or they need to have a qualifying long-term lease for the land that the home is attached to. So most of the time, again, you're going to see that the person who is going to be purchasing the mobile home is also purchasing the real property the home is attached to. You're going to notice that it says you need to please attach a legal description of the real property to this application. So if you're going to indicate the mobile home is real property, attach a copy of your warranty deed. You could print out an Exhibit A. I would very much prefer you at least attach a copy of your deed. The deed will help you a whole lot of the time. So again, you can fill in your GF number here. It's good information to have just so they have more ways to reference the application itself. Now, if they're going to designate the mobile home as for business use or non-residential or salvage, this is what Block 7 is for. This is something, again, that is not as common as just electing to treat this property as real property. So this is something that, for our purposes, we probably won't use a whole lot. Block number 8 is important. It's very first question, are there going to be any liens on the home other than the tax lien? Because remember, tax liens automatically attached to the property January 1. So this is, if you're going to have a purchaser that is purchasing the house with financing, then of course there's going to be a mortgage lien on the property. And that's something that TDHCA is interested in. They need to know that information. So if you're purchasing, if you have a contract that they're purchasing with a loan, you're going to check yes to this box, and you are going to fill out this box in its entirety. So date of first lien, again, you can either use the date on the deed of trust itself. I personally prefer to use the recordation date of the deed of trust. So this is something that, again, you could probably leave blank until you've gotten to the point that you've recorded documents. Name of first lien holder is really just your bank. So whatever bank that's offering the financing, their mailing address, city, state, and zip, and daytime phone number. Now, if they are having a second lien, so if this is a purchase with a first and second lien, which is highly, highly unlikely with mobile homes, but does happen from time to time, there is a block to fill in second lien information. And block number 9 is the very last block that we're actually going to have to put information into. And this is, if we need to get a copy of the statement of ownership to any other person other than the lien holder of record or the owner, then we need to provide our information. So as a title company, we're interested in this, right? Because just because we've submitted the SOL doesn't mean the property is fully converted from personal to real property. This is just one of the steps. And we need to know when the SOL has been issued so that we can go record it down to the county courthouse and perfect it. So this is somewhere where I would put my name and my company. So I would literally just type in Brad Hahn, capital title. I type in my mailing address, city, state, and zip, my office phone number, and my email address. And from there, my SOL is more or less completed, at least completed enough for me able to print out the form itself and keep it in my file when it gets closer to closing so that we can get this form signed. So again, it's a pretty easy form to fill out. Like I said, you can find this form on TDHCA's website. And then as long as you are able to locate your home detail on the Manufactured Housing Division's website, which again, I will give you a direct hyperlink for, so it's not something that you will have to go get yourself, then filling out an SOL is an absolute breeze. The only thing that you probably won't have the information for ahead of time is the date of sale if you're going to elect to use the recordation date of the warranty deed. And if your transaction involves financing, you're probably not going to have the date of first lien either, because that's something that, again, you're going to need to wait for the deed of trust to get recorded to have that information for. So again, this is really not such a difficult thing to fill out as far as the SOL is concerned. And I know that it seems like a scary form because a whole lot of us don't do very many mobile homes, but they're honestly a pretty simple, straightforward process. So I wanted to take just a little time to show you guys that. I hope you found that beneficial. But the next thing we're going to talk about is how to actually file the statement of location itself, because just because we've completed a statement of location doesn't mean that's the only thing we need for TDHCA to convert the property from personal to real. So a full statement of location or SOL package will have the following information. So first of all, we need to make sure that if there were any prior liens on the mobile home when it was elected as personal property, that those liens are released with a release of lien, or you have a paid in full letter. Now, I will say that even sometimes a paid in full letter doesn't always suffice, but it should. So if all you can get at the time is a paid in full letter, at least try and submit that, although obviously everybody would prefer to have a release of lien. Now, prior financing, when the mobile home was indicated as personal property, is something we're going to talk about in a little bit, because that can be one of the bigger, easy mistakes to make. Because again, if your mobile home is indicated as personal property and they had a financing of some sort to pay for that, I highly doubt that that financing was recorded in real property records, which means that's not going to show up on our title commitment. So that's something we'll talk about in a little bit. But for now, I want you to remember that you need to make sure that all liens prior to the transaction that we're closing have been released. Number 2 is taxes for the personal property account have to be paid, even if it's not payable season. So we'll talk about this again in a little more detail in a second. But no, just for example, if we were to be closing a mobile home transaction right now, and we say, hey, it's April 3rd, taxes for 2019 aren't actually payable or certified until later in the year, so I just need to send, TDHCA a tax cert showing 2018 taxes paid. That is absolutely incorrect. You have to make sure that you get the personal property taxes escrowed with the tax assessor collector, and I'll tell you how to do that in a little bit. But this is one of the more common mistakes, where people will submit an SOL without making sure that you have taxes either paid in full or escrowed correctly for the current tax year. And that's highly confusing, because that's definitely different than the normal way we deal with most real property. But again, this is on conversions from personal to real property. And again, if you need to get the tax figures for the current year for the property taxes, and I said appraisal district here, this should say tax office, so I'm going to switch this before my afternoon. You can contact the tax office and they will get you that information. But again, I'm going to get to that in a little more detail in just a little bit. Obviously, a full SOL package will have a fully completed SOL. So that means not only do you have the information from the home detail on the SOL, you have the SOL fully executed and notarized by all parties. And then obviously making sure we collect the $55 filing fee, and that's a check that you guys will just print out at funding and make sure you submit with your package when you send it over to TDHCA. Now we're going to talk about the perfecting method in just a little bit, but I did want to talk a little bit about what happens if you have a brand new mobile home on the property, something that wasn't existent prior to the transaction. Maybe it's just being placed on the property. So if you do have one of these on your desk, here's how you handle it. You're just going to submit the following information, which is, again, you want to submit an SOL electing the home as real property, because remember, all mobile homes are considered personal until otherwise indicated. You want to make sure that you submit the manufactured certificate of origin. This is kind of a birth certificate for the manufactured home itself, and the manufacturer or installer will have this information. So if you have a brand new mobile home, you could go to the listing agent or the buyer's agent, whoever is dealing with getting that home on the property, tell them you need a manufactured certificate of origin. They should be able to provide that information for you. Make sure you get a copy of the deed. That's definitely something that it makes it a little easier for TDHCA to see that ownership has changed. They will have a legal description on the warranty deed. They'll be able to make sure that the parties are the same. So again, we're going to want to make sure we submit a copy of that as well. And then again, the $55 filing fee for the SOL itself. And again, you can expedite the processing time for the SOL if you pay an additional $55. Now, once our SOL is issued, whether the mobile home is brand new or has been on the property for some time, we need to perfect the actual conversion from personal to real property. And I'm going to talk a little bit about that, because this is the step that gets missed more often than not with mobile homes. So once TDHCA has received all this information from you guys, and they have checked all their proverbial boxes, and they have everything they need to convert the property from personal to real, they will issue a statement of ownership and location, an SOL, and they will send it to the record owner, the lien holder, and whoever else information that you put in block 9, that very last block, saying that we need a copy of that. When you get this SOL back, you will need to turn around and record the issued SOL with the county clerk where the home is installed. So wherever that home is, whether that be Guadalupe, Baird, Travis, Williamson, wherever your mobile home is located, you actually have to take this SOL and record it in the real property records. And once you do that, you will take a copy of the recorded SOL in the real property records. You're going to stamp it filed, and you need to submit it to the county appraisal district, because this is how the county appraisal district really knows that they can combine their tax accounts from 2 into 1. Because remember, if it was a mobile home considered personal property, they're going to have a personal property tax account, and then they're going to have a real property tax account for the land that the home is located on. So again, that's step number 2. And number 3 is, once the SOL has been recorded, you need to provide a copy to the manufactured housing division. And there's an email address you can use to do that, and I'll give that to you in just a little bit. But again, I want you to know that this process is known as perfection. And until you've fully completed this process, the mobile home itself is not going to be converted from personal to real property. So I'm going to show you what that generally looks like on a home detail. So again, in our example, we've shown that our home detail is elected as personal property here. But if you had a home that was elected as real property and the perfection is done, you're going to get something that says the real property election of this home has been perfected. That means whoever processed the statement of location got one issued, took it to the county clerk, got it recorded, sent a copy to the CAD, and then sent a copy back to the manufactured housing division. So again, perfecting the mobile home as real property is a pretty easy process. So once you have that SOL back, you've sent it to the county clerk and recorded it, it's really easy to send it back to the manufactured housing division at TDHCA. You can do one of three methods to send it back to them. I highly recommend that you just send them an email. It's 2019 and everybody should know how to use email by now. Just send it via email. If you are stuck in the 90s and just absolutely have to use a fax, then go ahead and use a fax. And if you were stuck in, I don't know, the Civil War times and want to send something snail mail, feel free to do that. Now, generally speaking, when the manufactured housing division returns an SOL, once they've issued an SOL, they have a flyer that they stuffed in the envelope with that original SOL that has these very specific instructions that tells you, go record a copy at the courthouse, go give a copy to the county appraisal district, and then once it's recorded, send us a copy back. Now, from our point of view and the title company, the easiest way to do this is once you've sent an SOL package out to TDHCA, you need to hold your physical file somewhere on your desk for a couple weeks, because generally the process takes 2 to 4 weeks. And again, we don't want to forget that just because we've submitted the SOL doesn't mean that the perfection has taken place to convert the property from personal to real. Now, I'm just going to talk about some of the more general common issues that we see with mobile homes and how to avoid those. So number one is that the mobile home is missed entirely. So this is actually very easy to do if you're not, dealing with mobile homes on a consistent basis. Maybe you have a sales contract that is on a vacant land contract, and you get a survey and you don't really pay attention to the survey, but it says there's a manufactured home on the property, and you miss it entirely. You don't address it. We don't find out till 2 years later when somebody's getting nasty grants from the tax office saying pay your personal property taxes. They are very expensive to fix if you miss the mobile home in its entirety. And we'll talk about ways that you can not miss mobile homes, but just know that it's very time consuming to fix the mobile home issue. If we need to do something like convert a property from personal to real, and the closing took place in 2017, and we're not in contact with the seller, or maybe the seller owes us taxes and they're not responding to us and they've ghosted us, it can be not only very time consuming to get that process done, but incredibly expensive as well. If a year or two goes by on personal property taxes and we haven't paid them, obviously we're incurring penalties and interest at this point. And who do you think is going to be on the hook for that? Number two most common, we talked about this ad nauseum now, the mobile home was not completely perfected. And number three, and this is one of the bigger ones that Tracy Cadell over in Lockhart actually pointed out to me, and I'm glad she did, because this is something that is kind of scary. Liens on personal property are not released properly. So say that you have a mobile home that indicated as personal property, and you go onto the home detail site with the manufactured housing division, and you see that there's an active lien on the property. And I can show you what that looks like. In the active mortgage liens, it will have some information here if this is located as personal property. Now, because the property is elected as personal property, I highly doubt that whatever document that created that lien is going to be filed in real property records, meaning that your title commitment's not going to pick that up, your plant's not going to pick that up. So it's very important that you make sure you're checking the home detail page via the TDHCA website when you're researching your mobile home to make sure that you're not missing any personal property liens. That's pretty scary stuff. So again, when you see a mobile home, slow down, make sure you digest the information correctly, get as much information as you can. And of course, if you have questions, just ask questions to the listing agent, the seller. You're in the business of collecting information to make sure that you are conveying warrantable title. Now, in regards to additional common issues, taxes are another big one. Again, This is something that doesn't generally make sense to people who don't deal with mobile homes a whole lot, but do know that when you are converting a property from personal to real, you need to make sure that you collect taxes even if your current year's taxes are not due. So what I've done is I've given you a little table here, and if you'd like a copy of this, I can certainly email this to you, just let me know, of how you can really handle issues with taxes in regards to mobile homes. So again, if your date of sale is January 1 through June 30th, you're going to want to make sure that you provide with your SOL that the prior year's taxes have been paid and the present year's taxes have been prepaid and escrowed. Now, when we say prepaid and escrowed, what that means is go call the county tax office where the mobile home is located, where there's a personal property tax account. Tell them they're converting the property from personal to real. They will give you an amount of money to collect based on your closing date. And most of the time, they will send you a form for the buyer to sign at closing. And if you do all of these things, you will have satisfied the requirement for your present year's taxes to have been prepaid and escrowed. So again, July 1 through September 30th, TDHCA is not as concerned with the prior year's taxes, but they still want to make sure present year's taxes are prepaid and escrowed. And then October 1 through December 31st, you need to make sure that your present year's taxes have been billed and paid in full. So you need to make sure that you're collecting for property taxes, even if it's October 1st and Guadalupe County hasn't released their tax figures yet. You still need to be holding back and making sure you're collecting taxes for 2019 if it's closing this year, for instance. So again, easy ways to identify a mobile home and avoid issues like this altogether. Number one is your sales contract. Generally, a manufactured home that's going to be treated as real property shouldn't be on a vacant property contract. So check your sales contract. Number two, the easiest way to see them is on the survey. And this is something that a whole lot of people don't think about, but say you have a brand new survey done, you have a vacant property contract, and you don't even look at the survey, you just send it to survey review, and they don't see the manufactured home either because survey review isn't really concerned with whether or not your title commitment is correct. They're concerned with making sure they're accepting to what they need to as to matters shown on the survey itself. So the easiest way to identify a mobile home is just to look at the survey. It'll tell you very plainly, many surveyors will say very plainly, manufactured home. It won't just say 1 to 4 family structure. It'll say manufactured home. So again, pay attention to your survey. We talked about this a couple of times, but if you're opening an order, say you're entering the contract, you're on the County Appraisal District's website, and you're noticing that you are finding multiple tax accounts for the same property address or maybe the same seller, that's an indicator that, hey, there's a mobile home on this property. Most people with real property should only have one real property tax account. So if you're seeing multiple tax accounts on the CAD, there's your sign, essentially, that, again, there's a mobile home on the property. And again, if you are unsure about something or need more information, ask questions. This is your job as escrow staff to collect as much information as possible. And I'm sure that nobody will have any issue answering a lot of the questions that you might have regarding a mobile home itself. So I know we spent a ton of time talking about mobile homes, and that is absolutely intentional. And like I said, even if you don't close mobile homes now, if you don't feel like you're ever going to close mobile homes, it's still good information to have for the one that comes across your desk every 2 or 3 years. That way you know exactly how to handle those situations. And if you have some questions or concerns about mobile homes, let me know. I am more than happy to assist with this. And then we do have a couple teams in our Central Texas area that deal with mobile homes pretty consistently and are pretty much pros at it. So we can get you the answer if you don't actually have it in front of you as it stands. So for the last 15 minutes of the class today, I want to talk a little bit about entities. So I'm going to talk about what the difference is between entities, how to tell whether or not somebody has authority to sign something, the difference between existence, standing, and authority, what authority docs needs to review and create your signature block, and then what exactly to request from each entity. So first of all, most of the main question that we get regarding entity information, so if you have a contract with an LLC or an LP or an LTD or an incorporated, again, most people are like, well, why does it even matter? Why is it so important that we get the entity information correct? Why do I have to go get the operating agreement and the corporate resolution? Why do I have to get that information? It's such a pain in the butt. I hate making that phone call. Why do I have to do it? Well, it's important because the owner's policy and your loan policy both insure against the following. And I'm going to read this to you. Loss or damage by reason of any defect in lien or encumbrance on the title, including failure of any person or entity to have authorized the transfer or conveyance of a document affecting title not properly executed. What this means is if somebody signs for an LLC on the seller side and they did not have the authority to do that and it affects title, then we are on the hook for that as a title company. So obviously it's very important that we make sure that we have the correct people executing documents for entities and companies that are not individuals. And I wanted to give you guys two good examples of both on the owner's and the loan policy where it specifically states this information. So on your owner's title policy, it says right here, a document is invalid because of improper signature. And then number 3, a document is invalid because of incapacity or impersonation. Now, incapacity, meaning they did not have the legal capacity to sign this document. So whether that be through a corporate resolution. Again, loan title policy, it's very much in the same spot. Forgery, fraud, undue influence, duress, incompetency, incapacity. And the second one is even more specific, failure of any person or entity to have authorized the transfer or conveyance. So if we are not having the correct person sign documents for an LLC, we can be on the hook for it, not on the owner's policy itself, but also on the loan title policy, which is something we're pretty concerned with. So again, we don't want to just have any person signing our documents. We want to make sure it's the right person signing our documents. So some of the primary concerns with making sure we're having the correct person execute these documents is, again, what we call our ESA test. And if you want some more information on entities, there's an absolutely fantastic webinar that TLTA offers, and this ESA test is something that I pulled straight from there. There is an individual who presented this webinar, Mary Doggett. She works with National Investors Title Company. She explains this information very, very well. So I'm going to paraphrase a little bit of this ESA test and what this means. ESA stands for 3 things. Number 1, existence. You want to make sure that the entity legally exists. So the proof of this depends on what type of entity it is, but in Texas, that generally means that they're registered with the Secretary of State. Number 2, we want to make sure that the entity is in good standing. So again, most entities are subject to franchise taxes, which means they will have a certificate of account status. Now, this used to be known as the certificate of good standing, but now it's known as the certificate of account status. So again, we want to make sure that they are in good standing with the state. And then number 3, we want to make sure that they have the authority. So does the person signing have the authority to sign for the entity? And in order for us to determine that, what we're going to do is gather and review all the formation and governing documents, and we'll be able to make that determination. Now, I will say that everything on this slide here is not something that you guys will actually have to be doing yourselves, because we have the Authority Docs department. But it's important to know how the Authority Docs department is actually processing these requests, because they get a lot of requests in the light bulb where they just don't have enough information to be able to review what they need. So you should know that when you're operating on a contract with an LLC or incorporated or something like that, that you know that you need to make sure you satisfy the ESA test as far as what documents that you are requesting. So what I'm going to do now is just kind of go over some more common types of entities and what you can request for that. I also have a checklist that I can send you guys after the webinar is over that should help with knowing exactly what we need to request from each type of entity. So the first one we're going to talk about is corporations. So you're going to know that the company is a corporation if you see the word Inc., Incorporated, Corporation, or Corp. Those are all corporations. Generally, you're going to want to request a copy of the filed certificate of filing or articles of incorporation. Either one of these should be present. Have a signed copy of the bylaws, and then make sure that you get a corporate resolution identifying the property. Again, we're going to make sure that we are existent as a company. We are going to make sure we have good standing, and we need to make sure we have authority with the corporate resolution. Next one we'll see a whole lot is our limited liability companies. So this is LLC or series LLCs. This is one that is probably more common than anything else. And if you see an LLC, these are generally the pieces of information you want to request. So you're going to want a copy of the filed certificate of formation or the articles of organization. You're going to want a company agreement or an operating agreement if it's available. And then again, making sure we have a corporate res or a consent authorizing somebody to sign documents on behalf of the LLC. Now, if your LLC is a series LLC, there are a couple more requirements in regards to series LLCs, but again, just make sure that you gather the information needed for the LLC itself, and Authority Docs should have really no issue reviewing this information. Next, more common one we see is a limited partnership. So this is going to be LTD, limited, or LP. If you see any of these abbreviations or words, that is indicative of a limited partnership. So we're going to want to have a copy of the certificate of formation or the certificate of limited partnership. or want a copy of the partnership agreement. And if the partner is another business entity, request appropriate documentation based on type of entity. So what this means is, if you have ABC Company Ltd. and their partnership agreement says that they are run by DEF Company LLC, then not only are we going to want a copy of the limited partnership documents, we're also going to want a copy of the LLC documents. This is known as layering entities, and this is one of the more common issues we see in our title insurance world with entities themselves. We'll get to that in a second. Another one that's a little less common, but something you will see is a limited liability partnerships. That was an LLP. Generally, these are going to be law firms from my personal experience, but they don't necessarily limited to being law firms. Again, we want to make sure we have a copy of their certificate of formation, their partnership agreement, and again, if they have layered entities, we want to make sure that we are requesting appropriate documentation for the second entity. General partnerships, these are a little less common, but again, if you do see them, it's pretty easy what to request. Partnership agreement, if one exists, not all the time that they do. We need to make sure that every partner signs on closing documents. And if they have an assumed name certificate, we're going to collect that as well. Two more here. Number one is a joint venture. Again, it's something that's a lot less common. But if you do see something with a joint venture, you're going to want to make sure that you have a copy of the joint venture agreement. And again, if they layered their management with another entity, make sure that we're requesting that type of documentation as well. Last one we'll talk about today is not as common, but I have seen these personally, is churches and religious organizations. There is a large number of information that you probably will need to get in order to make sure that we are executing documents correctly. Although I will say churches and religious organizations are much more of a commercial style of business, so it's not something that we're going to see a whole lot on the residential side, although it is possible. So if you do have a contract eventually roll across your desk with a church or religious organization involved, this is some of the evidence that you're going to need to gather from them in order for authority docs to properly review the documents. So again, I'm sorry, I had one more here, this trust. So trusts technically aren't an entity, but we treat them like an entity with authority docs. So we want to make sure that if we have a trust, you get a copy of the trust agreement or the declaration of the trust. Certificates of trust, they can be acceptable if they conform to very specific requirements, but again, that's something that authority docs will help us determine. If any of the grantors or trustee or trustees are deceased, then you're going to want to make sure you have a copy of the death certificate for them. And if you have a trustee who has resigned, make sure that you get a copy of that resignation letter as well. Now, a lot of this stuff you probably already know, but what we're going to do is we're going to talk about some of the more common issues. I'm not sure why this sentence is just populating there. But we're going to talk about layered entities, which is something I mentioned a couple minutes ago. But again, it's where it's an entity's members or members are also entities. So I'm sure you've had this before where somebody has, you know, Home Investor San Antonio LLC, and they are member managed by Home Investor Austin LLC. Well, that's what we call layering entities because the members or managers, again, are also entities. So not only will you need to gather LLC information for whoever's on your contract, but you're going to need to gather LLC information for whoever the members or managers are as well, as many times as they are layered. So a lot of people do this because they think that it protects them and their personal property and it keeps their property separate, but we still need to see the information as far as who has the ability to sign for everybody. Powers of attorney. Now, generally, a statutory durable power of attorney is really not intended for use within entities. And it's tough because the Texas state statute and state code, they really don't, they're not written in a way where they even considered a power of attorney to be used by an entity themselves. But again, what do I do? And as our phantom sentence says here, refer to the governing docs to see who should act in their stead. Generally, if you have an LLC with one authorized signer and they come to you with a power of attorney and say, hey, I'm going out of the country for 6 weeks, I'm going to have this person sign under power of attorney. Yeah, no, we're not going to use that. Their certificate of formation or the governing docs should very specifically state who should succeed as an authorized signer. If not, we can get a new corporate resolution done. Now, of course, there is an exception of trust. Under trust, there are certain types of trusts that are worded a certain way that might potentially allow for powers of attorney. But again, if you have a trust where somebody's trying to give you a power of attorney, that's something that you're going to want to give to the authority docs department. They'll be able to tell you whether or not you can use them. Because some trusts might be worded in a way that limits delegations of power. So they might have a trustee that can't actually delegate their power via power of attorney, which is why it's important we get authority docs to review this information in the first place. The last most common issue that we commonly see is the fact that an entity doesn't have an operating agreement. It happens a lot with LLCs. And generally speaking, if you run across an entity without an operating agreement, refer to the certificate of formation. That generally is going to control how the decisions need to be made for the entity itself. But generally speaking, the entity should really create an operating agreement. And you can suggest that they do that. I'm sure they have maybe an attorney or somebody that they use to prepare a lot of these documents. So again, suggest that they should create an agreement really. But underwriting might consider as a substitute an affidavit as to members or a consent and resolution of members. Now, the consent and resolution is something that we see pretty commonly, a corporate resolution saying for this transaction specifically, we indicate that, Brad can sign closing documents. But again, it's a may. So just because you have this information, that is not 100% guarantee that underwriting is going to be okay with this. So if you run across an entity that doesn't have an operating agreement and maybe they're giving you trouble with the certificate of formation and they really don't want to create an operating agreement, then approach your underwriter, or you can ask me or Stephanie or anybody in your office, and we'll be able to forward you on to the right person. So really, that's it for today, guys. That's all I wanted to cover. I know that was a lot of information. I am going to go ahead and open up chat to questions right now. If you have questions, let me know. Just as a reminder, we talked a lot about mobile homes and where to find them. Yes, that is a Harry Potter reference. And I want you guys to feel more comfortable with statements of ownership and location. They are not a scary form. They don't need to be that way. They're really easy to fill out. And you just need to make sure that you provide all the information along with the SOL. But again, if you have a contract in your office with a mobile home and you feel uncomfortable about it, again, feel free to contact me. I am more than happy to point you in the right direction. We talked about entities and why it's important. Briefly, why getting the correct information from them is important, and making sure that the person who has authority to sign documents on behalf of the entity ends up signing the documents on behalf of the entity. So again, I know it's a lot of information today. I know a lot of this might seem like it doesn't apply to you, but we should always be on a path and have a goal to increase our knowledge as a whole. And I hope that you found this information beneficial. So I'm just going to give everybody a couple minutes to type questions in the chat. Now, after I wrap up this webinar, I'm going to send everybody who is in attendance today an email with our session quiz. And you have until the end of the day tomorrow to turn that back into me via email to receive credit for today's webinar. So first question was, the section 2B need to be completed on a SOL form? So let's take a look. Hold on. Where are we at? Yes, it absolutely does need to be completed. I absolutely glossed over it. I apologize about that. Now, generally, if it is an existing home, they should have a HUD label or Texas seal. You're not going to have this information unless you specifically ask for it. But yes, they will.